Okay, welcome back. I'm Cappadocia. Welcome back to World of Warplanes, Plane Facts. Today, this is where we look at aircraft in the game World of Warplanes, dig a little bit into the history of the aircraft, and then decide what they've done right, what they've done wrong. Today, as you can see, we're looking at the Hawker Typhoon. So this was designed and built by the Hawker Aircraft Company, but I say that, it was designed by Hawker. It was actually built by Gloucester, which is quite an interesting. I'm assuming Hawker did build a lot themselves, but I know it was built primarily by Gloucester. So there's that. Now it was single seat, and it was designed from the ground up to be a fighter bomber originally. It was in. They wanted it as a direct replacement for the Hurricane. So fighter bomber slash medium in height interceptor is what they were looking for. But it had issues, big issues with this aircraft. It did eventually do okay for itself. It became probably one of the most successful, if not the most successful ground attack aircraft on the Western Front, or the European Front, I should say. Very, very good aircraft in the end, but there were issues with it that they never, ever fully fixed, which is a problem. Originally equipped with the original design had 12 303 Brownings stuck in it, and was designed to have a more powerful engine. And to be fair, they ended up designing a good-looking aircraft. It has a few resemblances to the Western Whirlwind, a little bit, in the tailplane. But the rest of it looks like quite a nice aircraft until you look at it from the front with that great big mouth hanging off its front. It looks like it's just flying down like, oh, what's going on? It's not the most good-looking of planes when you look at it from the front on. So anyway, off they went. They decided to. They were developing them based on the two engines that were being developed at the time, which were the Napier Sabre and the Rolls-Royce Vulture engine. They designed them as N and R. So Napier, Rolls-Royce. Really quite simple. I mean, there's differences in the engine, so things had to be swung a little bit, but yeah. But they had to hold on. This was in. They were, they submitted the preliminary designs in 37. It wasn't. Didn't fly until 40, because I had to wait for a formal specification to replace the Spitfire and the Hurricane. And until that happened, it wasn't going to get off the ground. And to be fair, it never did really replace the Spitfire. They simply just updated the Spit and carried on. It had a lot of interesting parts to it. It was basically Gloucester, Hawker, Supermarine, Bristol. Each one submitted for this. The two prototypes to go with each engine were requested, so they built them. They took a lot of lessons from the Hurricane, from the updates and the design of the Hurry, and they learnt well from it and pushed a lot of it forward. So they knew more modern techniques but using similar ideas. So yeah, it was an interesting design. A lot of people like the fact that when they looked at the plane, the Air Ministry were very happy with the wings, specifically because the wings were very strong, very thick, and they were designed, they could hold heavy armament, they could hold bombs slung underneath, which would eventually become known as the Bombfoon in the press, and they were holding ammunition in the wings as well. So it was, the solid structure of the wing really helped it. So I mean, two fuel tanks, and nose tanks in the leading edges as well, but that's neither here nor there. So it could hold a lot of fuel. It had inward retracting landing gear built into it as well, so the wings had to be really, really strong to hold all of that. So it first flew in 1940. mostly because the Sabre engines, there was problems with the development of the Napier Sabre. So that didn't turn up until December 39. So there's no way they could launch it until then. But this is where the very first of the problems appeared. There's a report from pilot Philip Lucas saying he could see daylight through parts of the cockpit. And I don't mean the glass bits in front of him. So that's a problem. A big problem. You shouldn't be able to see holes. Yeah, that's not a good sign. Instead of bailing, he managed to land it, bring it back home, for which he was later awarded the George Medal. The bit of bravery in getting the plane back when he was looking down through the floor and looking at the ground. So, in 1940, they slowed production, slowed the development of this in the production, basically because they wanted to concentrate on the aircraft that they had that they knew worked. Which at that point in time, I don't really think you can blame Beaverbrook for that one. So in 41, they flew the second prototype. Now instead of carrying the 12 machine guns as originally, it carried 4 belt-fed 20mm Hispano 2s, which are, like I said, 20mm. So they flew that thing. Basically because there was problems with the Whirlwind and the Defiant, which they were trying to come along. They were trying to upgrade those two designs to get them into the fight. The Whirlwind was never going to happen, even though I personally like it. I think it's an awesome looking aircraft and it's a very interesting development story, but the Defiant was never going to get anywhere, mostly because the bombers it was designed to shoot down it couldn't catch. It was a turret fighter with no guns attached to the front. It's a bit of a problem. So they carried on with the Typhoon. So given that they owned Avro and Gloucester, Hawke and Siddeley was now a big group, so the Typhoon flew again. They had problems again with it. The Germans had just released the 109, and so there were problems with trying to catch the the 109, the 190, and there were problems with aircraft trying to catch it. It was fast. It was very, very difficult to fly. So the Typhoon was rushed into service at this point, which was not a good plan. Several went missing. Why they went missing? We don't actually know. There are suspects on it, but nah. And so more testing was done to upgrade it because they suspected problems with the aircraft. So they made some modifications to it, sent it up, and it killed the test pilot. The stabilizer weight broke free, making the plane very difficult to control, and then the tail snapped off, essentially, which killed the test pilot, which was Philip Lucas. Yeah. So they ended up putting reinforcing plates on the tail, which stayed there until the end of its service life, but it was something that they never fully managed to fix. It was always struggling, this plane, which is never a good sign. It only really started to come good around 42, which is when what it could really do was started to be seen. Basically, it could fly fast, which was its main thing, and the Luftwaffe were doing what would later become known as tip and run raids. So, flying in really low. Yeah, so this thing would then come back at them, flying low, flying fast, with its heavy armament. Yeah, 109's coming in, skimming the surface, bumping into Typhoons. The 190 was in trouble. So that's what they decided it was perfect to do this. I mean, One of the New Zealand squadrons. I forget which off the top of my head, I haven't written it down. They got 20 190s. Plus 3 additional bombers. Between, was it, some around, I haven't written this down. I've got 42, 43, but I know it wasn't the full year. It was something like October till summer sometime. So in about 6 to 8 months, yeah, they did pretty well in that regard. So the RF picked it up because at this point they're looking for this, not a pure fighter anymore. Situation's changed. There's new upgrades to the Spit, so we don't need now a pure fighter, and we don't want this thing to go high because there's been a few problems because from the side it looked kind of similar to the 109 and aircraft spotters were just civilians and not properly really plain people. They were trained to look at the sky and go, ooh, that looks a bit German. Bang! And given the fact that this thing did kind of look like the FW-190, well, there were a few incidents of what we would now refer to as blue on blue. British gunners shooting British Typhoons out of the air, which is something that the Air Ministry wanted desperately to avoid again. They started painting it with a big white nose. And with that stupid mouth underneath, you can imagine that made it look all the more attractive. So what they started doing with it is getting it to fly low. They realised that low altitude, this thing actually could do a really good job. This is where it shone. And so instead of using it as an interceptor or a multi-role, they decided to use it as a low-rate interceptor, but most specifically as a ground attack. Just rocket projectiles at the time were inaccurate, a new thing, but they strapped them to them, which is what this thing has in the game. And even though the rockets weren't reliable, good, destructive, but that they were. But they weren't really, the biggest problem was they weren't guaranteed to explode and they weren't always going to go straight to target, hence the reason for the guiding rails. But the quote goes that the sheer amount of firepower that one Typhoon could bring more than made up for the lack of accuracy. It's like the difference between tactical and strategic bombing. Yeah, tactical bombing, you're dropping things right behind or on top of your enemy. Strategic bombing, you're just bombing the shit out of everything inside. So, you know, it took a bit of skill to get in for firing, but yeah, what was it? Someone said, who was it who said it? I can't remember, but they said basically it was like a broadside of a ship. One Typhoon coming in. And yeah, they would fly in low, put their rockets in the vague direction of whatever they wanted to blow up, and let it loose. And on top of that, the 4 20mm cannons as well. You know, that's quite a lot of firepower coming down range at you. So yeah, you know, the problem was you had like the different equipments. In theory, you could switch between rockets and bombs, but in practice, that didn't happen. It was just too much of a pain to switch. So they kept them. Some squadrons used rockets, some squadrons used bombs. Theoretically, you could switch the bomb racks for missile rails, but yeah, it was decided to keep them as individual purely to, as one squadron proved themselves with one set of weapons, they were told to keep it. So you could hone your skills, hone the ability to come in on attack runs with that one particular weapon, which is what they really wanted to do damage in the background. When you look at the Normandy landings, D-Day, the Typhoon was there, and there were quite a few destroyed areas at the back, but according to research, only 10 German armoured fighting vehicles were attacked from the air, could be attributed to the rocket Typhoon. So that's not great. The Typhoons, again, during the breakout, they were there. But again, they could only confirm 9 tanks during the counterattack that were taken out by Typhoons. So hitting small targets, the Typhoon had a problem with. But it should be said that this was not based on exhaustive surveys. This is based on random samples. So they can't say for sure what it was doing. But just from random samples, they didn't take a survey of every jump. Let's face it, they didn't have the time. However, Eisenhower did say that the chief credit in smashing the enemy's spearhead must go to the rocket-firing Typhoon aircraft of the 2nd Tactical Air Force. The result of the strafing was that the enemy attack was effectively brought to a halt and the threat was turned into a great victory. So, there's that. It was also used, allegedly, I have to say, on this one, because this has never been sort of fully confirmed. There's hints, but cloak and dagger operations, hitting HQ areas of medium bombs and rocket attacks, we can't say for sure because it's never been confirmed, and most of the records are probably gone walkie somewhere. But they did launch an attack against the headquarters of Panzer Group West, doing a lot of damage there. And yeah, they attacked the Cap Arcona, the Sterbeck, and the Deutschland, which were converted passenger vessels into troop ships and supply convoys. So yeah, it did quite well. There were a few other issues other than the tail. There was a problem with carbon monoxide seepage, which is never a good thing, as we get into it, and the canopy. Because originally, the Typhoon had a forward opening door to get in. It was essentially like a car door on the side of the plane. Even had wide down windows on it. Great idea. The problem is getting out of it was a bit of a problem. Pilots nicknamed it the coffin hood. They put a solid metal fairing on it, and that was later renamed the coffin hood. This thing was known as a flying coffin at that point, because once you got in, there was no way you were getting out. If the plane was in trouble, you're not getting out through a car door in that, getting your belts off, getting out through the door. So a one-piece sliding bubble cockpit, like this one has, was placed on it instead. It was used eventually as a long-range fighter in early 43 by adding drop tanks to it. So it made name for itself as a long-range fighter and a long-range fighter bomber. But yeah, it really did struggle. By 1943, the Mark III now replaced the Mark I. IFF identifications and aerials were placed all over it, so that people could actually identify it. By the end of 45, she was gone. Yeah. They did try to make a C version of it as well, but that didn't work at all. Kind of similar to the C Fire in that regard, in that it just didn't really work at all. So yeah, I mean, in total it carried 4 Hispano cannons, 8 RP3 rockets, all 2,000-pound bombs or 2,500-pound bombs, depending on the configuration. Its total, its maximum speed at 12,000 feet with the Sabre and the Mark II and the 4-blade propeller was 422 miles an hour, or 679 kilometers an hour for my friends on the continent, or if you're an old arse like me, 367 knots. I'm getting better at making notes on this thing. So yeah, it was okay. It did well for the role that it eventually flew into, but it did not do very well in the role it was originally designed for. It caused itself all sorts of problems, and its lack of stability and its lack of reliability in the air were big problems. Like I said, the fuselage ripping apart, ripping itself into pieces in the air, the engine problems that went along with a new engine. These are things that caused it problems. So, now that we've done a quick history of the plane itself, how is it shown in game? Well, first things first, it is a fighter bomber, as you can see, with all the problems that comes in. I think the request for a fighter bomber, what it needs to do in order to rack up its role, is a bit difficult because you need to both be on attack and defend for the entire game, which, let's face it, is impossible. I'd like to see them change the aircraft destroyed while defending to just aircraft destroyed. I think it should be. I think that would be better, but that's just me. But specifically for this plane, now I do find with this that my controls go a bit weird. There's times when I'm trying to bank round and it'll suddenly turn and go the other way. I'm not quite sure why it does that, but occasionally it does. That's not me making excuses. It just does. I'll be honest, I don't really fly fighter bombers, so I've leveled them up to the top level on the UK tree, but don't really fly them very often. But it was a solidly built aircraft. It was. This is the bit that's really weird. It couldn't survive, especially the early versions of it. Couldn't survive on its own in the air, but it could survive being shot at from behind quite happily, providing it didn't hit the weights. Yeah, it seemed to be more happy to destroy itself than let someone else do it. So I suppose it was a bit. Yeah, especially with thick-set wings, things like that. In the game, I think this plane. I mean, it was heavily armoured. That's the thing. Don't get it wrong. It was designed to stop bullets coming in. So I think in game it's a little bit weak. I also don't think it's fast enough, comparatively. And it doesn't give you that broadside cannon feeling when you come in and just. Which is what it ended up doing, really, as a ground attack aircraft. So it doesn't give you that feeling. So what do I think they need to do with it? First of all, change it to the role that gave it a proper purpose. Ground attack. That was where it found its niche, as a low altitude interceptor and a ground attack aircraft. So let it become ground attack. Turn it into a ground attack. Take it away from being a multi-role. I know that is what it was designed to do, but its problems began once it tried to get above low altitude. So at low altitude, this thing was A-OK. So I think let it stick at low altitude, make it ground attack. A rocket arm ground attack. It's got 4 cannons in it. Let it be that. It was fast for a ground attack, so keeping it fast, giving it a bit more armor would be good, and a few more health points, and making it feel less like paper. This thing can't get stuck into a prolonged fight in the game. You can't do it. It is ridiculously bad at that. So that's what I'd like to see them do. I just don't think they've portrayed the Typhoon very well. I really don't. In this particular instance, it should be faster, should be more heavily armoured. It was never that agile. It just had to be more agile than the 190, and even then it didn't really do that. But it was fast, and it packed a hell of a wallop, and it was heavily armoured. So that's what they need to more concentrate on with it. I think they tried to make it too much of a fighter bomber and tried to get it involved in things it never did. Because it wasn't very good at them. It was designed to do it, but it just couldn't. So I think that's what they need to do, in my humble opinion. And I think at that point, it would be what the Typhoon was. But anyway, just before I finish, I'm going to leave you with one last little thing. And this is a quote from Des Scott, who was the squadron leader of 486 Squadron, based at Tangmere Airfield, which is not too far away from me. Been there several times. And And this is a quote after he flew the Typhoon for the first time. Said she roared, she screamed, she groaned, she whined, but apart from being rather heavy on the controls at high speed, she came through her test with flying colours. Applying a few degrees of flap, we swung down on the airfield onto the airfield approach, levelled out above the runway, and softly eased down onto her two wheels, leaving her tail up until she dropped of her own accord. We were soon back in her bay, by the dispersal hut, where I turned off the petrol supply cock. After a few moments, she ran herself out with a spit, sob, and a weary sigh. Her great three-bladed propeller came to a stop. And so that was it. And I was drenched in perspiration and tired out. So this was not a plane that you really wanted to try and fly. She was, a stable gun platform. It was solid as a rock according to other reports. But she was a bugger to fly, and she didn't like to turn. But point her nose at something, pull the triggers, and it disappeared. But anyway, I'm going to leave that there. So again, thank you very much for your time. And for the minute, I've been Cappadocia. Signing off.